Welcome back to the Blink podcast. We are coming at you live from the London studio. And everyone will know that we've been bringing you the best in how to get leaders involved, how to get employees involved, but also how to create a culture of trust when it comes to communication. And I'm pretty excited, maybe for reasons that I don't fully understand yet, to welcome Paul to the podcast. I think it's fair to say, ever since the idea of this podcast was born, Georgie has been extremely excited to have you into the Westland Place studio, Paul. I sort of feel as though this is a professional connection which definitely outlives my time. So I'm interested to understand a little bit more about you and your role, and then maybe we'll kick it to Georgie to...
why are we here?
Yeah, that would be good for me and all of the listeners. But first of all, a big welcome to you, Paul. Do you want to maybe start by explaining a little bit more about you and who you are and where you work?
Yeah, so, well, thank you for having me, really, firstly, in terms of obviously today. A bit about me. I'm currently Chief Executive Officer of Carlisle Support Services. Born in Sheffield, Yorkshire lad. Ran into supermarkets in my earlier career, so obviously I ran supermarkets, very much in terms of on the tools. Fell into recruitment for a bit, and then fell into this wonderful world of security facilities management about 25 years ago.
Wow.
And again, similarly started right at the bottom, locking and unlocking buildings in and around sort of the East Midlands area. So really fortunate to have worked with some amazing people and to have had a journey across different sectors, different industries. But yeah, really pleased to be leading what is now, I'm biased to say this, aren't I, clearly, one of the most attractive and fantastic businesses in our space.
Yeah, I mean, you're here to beat the Carlisle drum. We're here for it, don't worry. Well, I'm also excited that you're here, Paul. I've been telling Peter ever since we wanted to discuss, like, how do we get leaders involved in being good communicators? I was just like, we have to have Paul on the pod. Not just because that sounds cool, Paul on the pod. That's when you know, internal strapline. But you have always shone through, I think, really in a refreshing way in maybe an industry that doesn't necessarily always have that, as being a leader that's very active, that's very empathetic in your communication. And you really believe in getting out there, spending time with your employees, knowing the front line. And maybe that's because of your background and how you got to being CEO today. But I really want to get into it today and hopefully share some really, really good nuggets, not just of your experience, but also what's changed and why you think it's so important. And I know it's just a huge differentiator for Carlisle and why you're, winning and doing great things in the space as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I do remember meeting, I don't know if we met at the Innovation Lab or maybe in an office.
I've heard a lot about this Innovation Lab.
The infamous Innovation Lab.
It is infamous. I've been invited to it quite independently of this discussion a couple of times. So you've obviously got a great kind of...
good reach.
Yes, internally it sort of feels as though everyone knows that this is the showpiece event of the year.
Yeah, started with 6 people talking about ideas, probably about 8-9 years ago, and now this year we've had 700 people. And actually, interestingly, we talking about obviously communication. We 2 years ago introduced frontline colleagues to come and join us. So we pull what are called contract champions out of every single contract. So we get the whole representation of people who actually deliver our services, people who manage, people who support that function, all the way up to our clients involved. And it's a fantastic. I mean, every year it becomes harder because you need a bigger boat. In terms of this year, it was at the XL.
Oh wow!
Every year we're obviously seeing it become bigger and bigger, and ideally with like-minded people to try and obviously in terms of improve communication, engagement, and in terms of obviously innovation.
Yeah, and I remember, you always have killer speakers. And you had a speaker from Disney and I just became obsessed, and my boss sat next to me at the time and was like, do not leave me for Disney, because I was so inspired to always secure amazing speakers and deliver such a great event. But I'm surprised you've come south. I thought the North venues were in the blood of Carlisle, so I'm impressed.
Yeah, well, we just like to take it around everywhere, really, in fairness, and make sure that we take it to every part of our operation. So we're very fortunate to have XL as a customer, as we have most of the venues where we've hosted it.
Nice.
We work in some amazing sectors, whether they be events, whether they be some of the other areas that we work in.
Yeah.
The Disney story at some point, if we get to it, is a very interesting story as to how we got Disney.
Oh, okay.
That is a very interesting
All right, let's try and
story.
weave Disney somehow into the conversation today. Amazing. starting?
Well, I mean, I think I would love to say let's get started, but I know by now that we have a little bit of a... yeah, this is Georgie's little love child, this section
Sorry,
of the pod.
but every event, podcast very similar, but you need some forced fun in life, not just in podcasts.
Sure.
So I decided we should do a like this or that, or would you rather? And I said, we should start by saying, would you rather do some sort of sketch or do a would you rather? And I haven't given you any sketching materials. So would you rather do a this or that or a sketch? Not a sketch. So, Paul, I've got a couple for you. You need to decide, would you rather?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you rather announce tough news face-to-face or behind a perfect crafted email?
Oh, it's got to be face-to-face.
Warming you up, Paul, warming you up. That's a leading one.
Okay, good start. Paul, would you rather admit you messed up or just double down, bluff it out, smooth it over?
Oh, I've admitted that I've messed up many times.
So hands up.
20 odd years.
Okay.
Okay.
No bluffing here.
Getting harder.
Okay.
Three out of 6.
Okay, would you rather reply to 100 angry DMs or emails or film 10 custom apology videos?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. Well, I suppose probably in terms of filming the videos would allow us to actually, in terms of manage the message and to actually make sure that we've covered every angle.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably
Videos.
in terms of filming the videos.
Nice. Okay, next. Would you rather go live unprepared or read a perfect sort of script word for word?
Probably read a perfect script. Yeah.
Okay, let me stop there.
Oh.
Why is that? What was your thought process there?
Oh, just because communication is so vital that you don't want to get it wrong. And therefore, you only get one chance to make that right impression. And I suppose an interesting story about having 5,000 staff now, 5,500 staff is, and I genuinely feel embarrassed about this, is that, but my staff are, or the family members as we call anybody who works in Carlisle's family, they're brilliant at this, but they will recognise me. So, for instance, I went to Wembley the other day, saw some of our staff, but I feel really embarrassed not to know all 5,000 names.
Oh.
And I genuinely, and I have this real big, and I speak to my other half about it, and I have a real big thing about it in the businesses. And I sometimes think, should I have a black book of everybody? A massive book of everybody. But the staff are brilliant about it because they recognise that you can't know everybody. But to that point, you want to make sure that communication with them is the right communication, and therefore it is managed in the correct way. And therefore, whilst it might be sort of scripted by the nature of being a perfect script, you also will only get that one touch point on
if that's the only opportunity.
In terms of, so you want to land it correctly.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, obviously these questions are a little bit, crafted to sort of show two totally different perspectives. But I think that's an interesting take on having a perfect script. It's not that you're scared or concerned to sort of like be out there and human.
Be vulnerable, yeah.
But at the same time, you feel as though you have a commitment to people to deliver the right message and be well informed and not fluff your lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, I used to work for a business that the CEO would go around and his PA would sort of prepare a ring binder of anyone internally that he was about to meet so that he could have not just names but also positions, accolades, interests and so on.
Oh, wow.
So that he was both sort of seemingly live and in person and unprepared, but at the same time, like totally over-prepared.
Have you seen The Devil Wears Prada?
No.
That's where they got that idea from.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah. Probably not, but that happens in The Devil Wears Prada. Anyone who's a rom-com fan will know.
I never had John Chambers down for a rom-com fan, but there we go.
There you go. Well, I do think that's interesting because a lot of the time it just depends on the channel as well, doesn't it? Because going live might be great, but if you do that, like Peter said, at different cadences, like every week, you've got an opportunity to do that in a more unpolished way.
Okay, so this one's a great follow-up to that one then, because it builds on that theme. So lead with heart but make mistakes, or be polished and forgettable?
Oh, I'd lead with the heart and make some mistakes. I mean, people remember that so much more and will give you so much more time if they feel that you are genuine in that space. I absolutely, and in fact, I can remember many times. I mean, COVID's a perfect example. Is that I put at the bottom of my communications to the staff, I put my mobile number at the bottom of that. And somebody said, what on earth have you done that for? They'll ring you. And I said, exactly. How good's that?
Yeah.
And therefore, I remember having conversations with people, genuinely.
And people did ring you?
Yeah. I mean, and that was the whole point about it, is you wanted people. And they rung me at 9, 10 o'clock at night. And challenging time, but I still remember some of those calls because the people were in scared times.
Yeah, especially the industry you're in, right?
They didn't know whether they should go to work. They didn't know if it was safe. They didn't know what the precautions were going to be. We then had, obviously, in terms of vulnerable people who are in the family household. So, what's the actual policy around that bit? So we had a range of communications that were obviously in terms of formal. I suppose probably thinking about what you've just asked about that. Would I rather? I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a mixture of different communication styles and different communication mediums to actually go at. But you'll never lose that ability. And equally, when you're walking across, I mean, I'm fortunate that I lead an organisation that works in a lot of public spaces. So, for instance, if I walk across some of the major city centres, whether it be London, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, I'll bump into, whether it be a security officer in Tesco's, a cleaner at the train station, somebody in one of the hospitals. And genuinely, it's so nice. And we were in Manchester the other night, and somebody who I worked with 2 or 3 years ago literally came to the high street and said, "Oh, hello, Paul." Oh. And it was a guy called Nick. And it was literally, he'd gone from us, he'd gone on to something else, and we just had a chat. And I think that you wouldn't get that to your memorable bit and being forgettable. I remember those conversations that I had with Nick around when he was employed, when he was part of our family, and he doesn't forget that. Whereas I think if you were on just a piece of paper or you were just a letter that came out, a signatory, and I think you would lose that. No people would have that actual memorable interaction with you.
So did you regret putting your phone number on your email?
No.
Oh, that's great.
No,
Not too many prank calls?
Well, the media rang up. I don't know how they got hold of it.
Gosh.
And equally, one of the unions rang up and they wanted to test whether they could get through to a senior leader at 9:30 at night.
And they did.
And they did. And I actually said, "What can I do for you?" They went, "We've got no idea because we didn't think you were going to answer."
Pick up.
They wanted a story about how leaders might say they do something, but they don't live and breathe what they actually do.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely quiet. And that's built a longer relationship with one person of that side of it that led to more of a strategic relationship with them that's helped our family members in a different way.
And how telling as well, they didn't know what to say when you picked up the phone.
Because equally, they'd said that they'd rung a number of other leaders that evening and they'd not got through to them.
Wow.
We'll move on from this because, but it's a good conversation because I think, your previous question was go live unprepared or read a boring script word for word. And you said read a boring script, which surprised me. But your reasons were, well, I don't want to get, I respect employees too much to get details wrong. I don't want to be unprepared. And I think sometimes this is the things that we pit against one another, but they're not mutually exclusive because you want to lead with heart and make mistakes, not be polished and forgettable. But I guess the subtext there is leading with heart and making mistakes over small, maybe you fluff your lines, you repeat your words, but you can still be prepared and lead with heart and make mistakes.
Absolutely.
That's the sort of perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we do pit them against each other, don't we? We're like, well, if someone wants a script, they're not authentically communicating. And it's like, well, it's okay to be prepared because you want to respect to deliver the right message.
I think it's a great perspective, because you're the first CEO that we've had in this year's lineup, Paul. And often we're talking to internal communicators, and this is the kind of conversation we're having. Sometimes they just want to read from a script, or they want me to write it, and it's annoying. I just want them to bring their human selves, but to kind of hear that other perspective of no, I'm good with being myself, but I also need to be prepared and have the details because I have a responsibility. It's a good rounded perspective.
And maybe that's a nice little segue to our. You love that. Am I supposed to be saying segui?
You do you.
Okay.
Idiot.
Into our there's a love-hate relationship here. Sales and marketing. Into our first sort of theme. I really wanted to get into how being a leader and communicating as a leader has changed. And I feel like we've touched on a few points there around the stigma of having something perfect and polished rather than showing up and being unprepared or whatever. But Paul, I want to understand, especially through such a rapid period of growth for Carlisle, how has that looked different in terms of communication internally as a business and you as a leader? Do you feel that's changed a lot in the last decade?
Yeah, it's certainly changed in the scale. Like I said, those extra 4,000 employees who have joined us as that part of that family have definitely, in terms of taken us into different areas. I think the actual sort of technology side of things have changed. We went back and we've still gone back, and it's interesting. I think that communication is that whole suite of tools. I don't think it is just one thing that you say, do you know what, that's the bit that you can actually obviously nail.
Yeah.
We went back to actually publishing a staff magazine, and that has actually allowed us not only to drive content through there that then comes into a digital medium, but I think also one thing that has definitely changed for me in terms of that scalability is also needing other people on the boat with you. And that is part of, but you also need to make sure that they are similarly rowing in the same way. Because there's nothing worse for a family member to see, obviously, yes, the figurehead saying one thing, and then 3 or 4 levels down, they're seeing something completely different. So I think that journey of how we, in terms of keep it authentic, can't just be one person. And I've sort of said that long and hard on many communications internally, that it has to be. And one of my old customers, who actually ironically was from a previous employer, said, I'll believe all this when I see the front line communicating in the same way. And he was referring to one of the social platforms that we use, which is LinkedIn. And he was saying, in the early days, he said, I'll only believe this if I see Carlisle's frontline staff actually telling their stories. And that has probably been the greatest thing that I've looked back and said, you know what, you've got proud cleaners, security officers, people in events who absolutely just love telling what they do. And I think that's like spinning it upside down, really, and you've actually got messages coming up. Last year we had our greatest ever engagement survey in terms of participation rate, which again our NPS went forward, and our staff were just having a chat with the HR director yesterday. Our staff turnover rate is now obviously in terms of one of the lowest it's ever been, and certainly outperforms our market. We don't get it right all the time, though. I think I'm not going to sit here and sort of try and say that it's brilliant at Carlisle, everything's rosy. But I think there is a definite drive to, in terms of go that extra mile. I mean, our Simon Sinek purpose, which is what we did around 8 years ago about defining our why, is all about being different in the top part of our why statement. But how we do that is by, in terms of being completely visible with a prominence around the front line, and then creating rewarding and enjoyable work environments for our people to play in. And I constantly, and even this week I was having that constant discussion, as we get bigger, not losing sight of that, because that's got us here.
That's equally, your secret sauce.
If you lose that, you lose what, in terms of the next generation of customers will be. And I think that's the biggest thing, is to make sure you treat that one customer who joined you 8 years ago in the same way you treat the new customer who's joining you today, because they did get you there, and therefore you've got to make sure you look after them.
It's really quite, I think, revealing just listening to the language that you're using, like, talking about your family members, creating an environment for them to play in. Like, this is not, I think, language that would exist or survive in other organizations, which I think is quite telling of the type of culture that you've created. You talked about where things potentially go wrong. Definitely want to talk about that. Like, we're not in the business of just presenting rosy pictures here, so hopefully we can touch on that. You said something right at the start, though, about employee magazines, which is quite a provocative topic. And we started the question by talking about how things had changed. Tell us where and how and when magazines appeared and why, because I think there'll be lots of people listening to this going, that stuff's old hat. Why are you printing stuff anymore?
Well, they appeared. They disappeared for a digital solution, and then they reappeared with a combined sort of hybrid. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is, and again, these are the examples, is it's not necessarily about communicating. Yes, it is communicating with that one family member who works for you, whose address it goes to. We ask our employees, and you go back to that COVID time, but even now, some of the environments that we work in are challenging, whether it be with the shoplifting crisis, whether it be the cost of living crisis, whether it be we ask people to check tickets on trains where not everybody wants to be as compliant in these days. We have to govern and we have to police certain environments we look after. So we ask family members and friends of our, in terms of colleagues, to probably support them through a hell of a lot. They are the ones that allow them to come home and go out each day, in terms of knowing that they've got to go and do a job that is challenging. And we brought that communication back for a number of reasons, in terms of it was because it's able to land on the doormat on a Saturday morning. And it goes into their home environment, not intrusively, but obviously clearly it lands into their, and therefore it allows them to read it at leisure. So they're not reading it at work. They're able to read it for, like we're doing now, over a cup of tea, for instance. Or what is the most powerful thing is, it shows the children, grandkids, partner, the type of environment that they work in and the type of company they work for. And no disrespect, and whilst you will have understood a bit more about Carlisle in terms of as we've got towards this date, there's still people in the UK who come and work for us who go, crikey, I did not know you looked after Eurotunnel, or I did not know you looked after Tottenham Hotspur, or you do this on the railways. And therefore, it's a real opportunity. And I suppose, in fact, when I always used to say, it's like that elevator pitch, when you go down the pub and they say, well, who do you work for? It allows them to sort of say, well, I work for this organisation that's not just one contract, but it's now a whole range across the UK of different environments. And what we have seen, even in the last couple of years through effective communication at operational level, we've seen the ability, and we've seen it more and more, of employees working on one contract, but then all of a sudden jumping over and going, oh, but I didn't realise I could go and work on that contract. And actually, that's come through different, it doesn't always need to be a printed medium, that.
Right,
But it's allowed them to sort of realise, oh, crikey, 1 minute I can be working here, next minute I can be working at Great Ormond Street, next minute I can work in somewhere else. And it's really built that sense of, and I'm going to use that word again, because it's that sense of family. I've said this so many times, in fact, we have divorces, we have arguments, we have fallouts, we are a true in that regard. So we try and support everybody to feel as though they're part of that family. And some of the other initiatives about leadership are also trying to fight for them. In some of the discussions we have around wages, we were one of the first companies in the UK to adopt a real strategy around real living wage. We were one of the ones, obviously, first to bring the income stream inside in, so we were actually obviously partnering to allow to get rid of payday loans challenges in this environment. And we'll constantly, going back to that Simon Sinek start with why, that first bit about being different. We want the employees to feel as though they've got an employee who doesn't just see them as a, and I say it's crass to say it, but as a number. We want them to feel as though they've got an actual sort of role, which they play amazingly well in terms of what they do for the customers that we look after.
And even just in everything you've said there around, the magazine, and that it lands on a Saturday morning, maybe that's not when they're working, is that you can, they can switch off and engage at a time that's on their terms. So you're not like asking for them to read it during a shift, before a shift, etc. And I think that's really key as well. And it sounds like one of your big drivers, Paul, not just around the magazine, but communication and maybe some of your initiatives, is you want people to feel proud.
Absolutely.
And have real pride, and it sounds like the magazine delivers that as well as lots of the other initiatives.
We used to call it, and these are all little communication. We used to, we don't used to, I've just taken mine off, but we used to have what was a Carlisle lanyard. We used to call it, we do actually call it the power of the lanyard. And if you go across London, across the Tube network, you'll see different Carlisle lanyards, and it's like, wow, you work for Carlisle, it's so proud in terms of that moment. We want people, we've just bought them all nice jackets so they can move around in terms of from that point of view, so they've got Carlisle in terms of they're proud of it, and we want them, genuinely to feel. We're not a household name because we're in the B2B market to a certain degree, but we do want them to actually feel as though they attach. They've got some attachment, because if they never have some attachment, it becomes easy for them just to go, do you know what? I don't feel that I represent this company. I don't feel I can attach.
I'm just a security officer like I am for every other supplier or provider.
What about you personally though, Paul? So we're talking about this idea of how to get leaders involved in internal communication. I'd be interested to just understand a little bit more when you reflect on your own capabilities here. Was it nature? Was it nurture? How did you become the type of internal communicator that you are today?
I think really from my point of view, it probably goes back to, and we did touch on it right at the outset, I think it does go back to starting where you've come from. Not degree educated. I'm not saying that going to university is right or wrong. People go and do that, and some people go and do that later in life. But I literally, again, my father had a phrase that said, graft covers up so many sins. And he's probably true in that style, is that if you work harder, there's more chance of you getting more opportunities, because you get more opportunities come at you. It doesn't mean you're the best at what you do. And therefore, and also the sacrifices to this in terms of later on when we will get to that, is for me, I learned so much more, good and bad. And I was just having a chat with somebody earlier this afternoon, one of my senior team, that by being out on the ground, I learned so much more about my business. And there's a frustration with that, is as we get bigger, my CFO might want me in the office more. Because there's need to be, and that's probably a bit, you talk about personal development. There's that strike now between, you've created a business where people expect you to be visible, but they also expect you to do the corporate side. And talking about the word family members, and I love them to bits, but my board, when we wrote my annual report, which is a very formal document, because it obviously goes on Companies House. And we had this discussion about, should they be called employees or should they be called family members? And I was like, no, they're called family members. No, in corporate text, they have to be named as employees. And we had this whole discussion around it. But I think for me, I probably sort of say, I kept more enjoyment by being on a train at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning and getting somewhere and actually spending time, or going to, and even, like I said, going to a football game and seeing our staff, or going somewhere else, than I do out of enjoyment. So I'm in a great job because I've got a great team below me that equally obviously allow me, they probably are my backstop in some areas. I can't be the specialist in everything. And I've had a stable team in that regard for just over, probably about, most of them have been with upwards of 3 years now. So it allows me to do what I love doing, which is in terms of trying to take this business in a different way. We've got some real exciting ambitions to continue the journey, and really that plays to my strengths of sort of trying to lead from the front, really, in that regard.
And do you think you'd seen that from other people? Like, as you were explaining, you worked in retail and other industries. Did you see other really visible leaders and thought, oh, I really enjoy working here because I actually know how my leader is feeling and thinking, and I feel part of this? Like, has there been some sort of inspiration, or was it, just based on you and your personality?
It's interesting, actually. And I think that some of the leaders I've worked for aren't that outward facing, and there is one, I won't name because it's not right, but he used to control his desk with a red pen. But he had a great commercial person, a great operator, and a great finance person, but he never moved out of his desk for his
like
entire,
an actual red pen,
for his entire 5 years. And so, and I worked for him for 5 years, and therefore I suppose, but we were doing the bit that leader didn't need to do, if you know what I mean. So I would suggest that my mentors probably have been different people in that regard. So I don't think I look at somebody and go, that's absolutely. I think where I do get, and probably open a bit of vulnerability here, I get very emotional in terms when I speak to people on the front line, and it's. So I don't know why I don't know if that should drive me or whatever, but to the point of, and I also therefore, I think I talked about not being able to be everywhere and remember his name. I also have this very big thing about, and I don't know how to deal with this, and I've tried to speak to a lot of people in business about it, is I have a big thing that I'm paid a salary that is not in comparison to the people that deliver the service. And people say, you can't have that, Paul. You've got to understand there's hierarchical things.
Yeah.
But there's that, and that probably drives me on to when I walk across a city centre, and it does cause issues at home, it causes issues around that, is, just pop into Tesco, just see that security officer, or we're just walking down High Street, we'll just spend a couple more minutes. But as you get bigger, and I equally look at large organisations in my space, is that a need, or is that just a Paul thing? Have I got that ingrained, and actually is that, and we talk about scalability, is that ever to be able, are you ever going to see everybody every day?
Yeah.
And therefore, how do you do it? And that comes back to some of the platforms, is that as we scale, we've got to get communications that can do that.
Still feel like
still feel that
to
Paul's got a
line.
Message for them.
Yeah.
But how do we use technology better?
You can't pop into every Tesco.
No.
That might be a Guinness World Record attempt.
Well, we did way back. We did. In fact, we've done it a few times, and in the first earliest years of Carlisle, and bless her, I'm going to name check her here because so Nicole, who's been with me all the way through, was my director of marketing, and a lot of our strengths I play back to Nicole, and I say, do you know what? A lot of the branding, a lot of the communication, whilst I can be the front of it, there are so many different people, and Nicole's been part of that journey all the way through 8-9 years, and I said, I absolutely got known as the biscuit boy in our industry, and I'll tell you why that's quite funny.
Who gave you that? Was that self?
Competitors gave it.
Oh, right.
Your industry.
The industry gave it me. And still now, some of the CEOs who, if they ever listen to this, some of the CEOs who are in CEO positions, who may have been sort of just a little bit below where they are now, they literally, I'd go to meetings at an industry level and they'd say, oh, Paul, have you brought the biscuits? And they'd do it. But they did it about 18 months ago. And do you know what that says to me? That really worked 8-9 years ago. They really did not like the fact that we were doing it. But equally, we were one of the first companies to also look at instant recognition awards. We've got the Carlisle Superstar Award scheme. And these are all vehicles to go and communicate with somebody. They're not actually, having that, but it's a way of you actually interacting
But
with
it's
somebody.
connecting with somebody in a more authentic way, because you know British people like a cup of tea and a biscuit.
So the biscuits, I said to Nicole, I said, we come up to Christmas and we created this, we've done it many times, we called it 12 days of Carlisle Mess. And what we said, and I would probably say, looking at the time, we probably had about 2,200 staff, because it was about a couple of years in, or probably a year into the journey. I've been here now nearly 10 years, so it's about a year in. This was a business that needed transforming. It had lost its way. Had gone from 80 million turnover to 30 million turnover in 18 months. It was hemorrhaging and disappearing. And I said, you know what we'll do? And I remember it. And a couple are with me now still in the senior team who have been with me all the way through. And I must have ruined their Christmases to a certain degree. But they all got on board with it. And I said, do you know what? Do you know those Danish tins? You know the big red Danish tins that you get of Danish cookies at Christmas?
Yeah.
I said, right, we've got 2,300 staff.
Oh,
Go
my
and
gosh.
order me 2,300 Danish cookie tins. And they turned up. And we said, right, we
Oh, actually, you did it.
We'll take, yeah, we did it.
Well, first they had a team meeting and said, Paul's lost the plot.
Yeah. Who's ordering the biscuits?
We took Danish cookies to every single person in the business.
Wow.
And literally, there's photos.
So this is
and
like you and
everything.
all your leadership team, all
And
like
we
divide
went-
and conquer.
Yeah, and we had trolleys, we had suitcases of them. You look back now and you think, actually, when we do look back, and one thing that I'd regret, this is completely different, is I'd regret not keeping Libidary yearbook. Because the journey has been, it's all there, it's all on your camera and your phone, but we had people, but that camaraderie. And equally, some of the other companies have now started doing that 12 days of Christmas stuff and stuff like that, because that's an opportunity to give back.
Yes.
Do you, I'm just sort of listening to you and trying to sort of piece this together. And it feels to me like the journey that you've been on has actually contributed to the internal communication style that you have. Because how many people was Carlisle when you started?
1,600.
Okay. So, big organization, but probably still intimate enough that like you can see visibly every day the impact that you communicating regularly and well has on not just like how your customers feel, but I would wager actually like how you're not just how your employees feel, but also how your customers feel about the service that you're providing. And I guess lots of leaders maybe come into companies that are much bigger and are already instantly like far removed from the action, if you like. So never quite have those sort of synapses in their head going, I understand if I communicate with authenticity and empathy, it has this direct impact on the way that we work as a business. You're now sort of, you've whatever you've done, quadrupled in size since then, still trying to do the things that have made you successful from a communication perspective because you've seen it, and it sounds like it's been a big part of your growth story. Other people don't have that lived experience.
No, and it's frustrating because one of my other things now, as I sort of, don't worry, I'm not going anywhere, but as I move into probably, I turn 47 tomorrow, so 47th birthday
Oh my gosh,
tomorrow.
happy birthday, Eve.
Yeah, but as I move into the next 10 years, I suppose I'd love to be able to replicate that in the industry. So Carlisle is doing well.
Yeah.
And I sort of not calling out bad practices, but trying to understand why people don't want to do it. So to your point, why do other leaders not feel that that's important? And I appreciate the scale bit, but equally the bit about, and I used to use this image at all the conferences all the way through the last 10 years, is this tower block of the water being turned on and how we drip it down. I'm sort of trying to get that and doing a lot of work in different spaces in our sector around how we can improve talent, how we can attract new, better opportunities for our people. Because traditionally in our space, in the outsourced services market, we've got to try and not just be in terms of seen as a commercial solution, but actually a sort of one that's adding true value. And I think that's the battle of the devil in between there, is that you get people who will always go and bid contracts versus, well, what does that actually mean to the people who are going to deliver the service? And I think there's a quandary between the type of customers that you can find. And I'm very fortunate that we've got 65 great brands that we look after, great customers, and all of them have supported that journey to sort of say, well, do you know what, we recognise that if you look after our customers well, they look after the customers onwards as well.
That ethos. And
yeah.
But listeners won't have been to one of your conferences. So humour us with the tower block analogy or metaphor.
Well, the tower block analogy was early on, and I suppose in fairness, even now your listeners might be thinking, crikey, this mad guy's just talking about obviously how he tries to obviously drive all this through. And it was about a journey really, about sort of if you imagine sort of a tower block that had 5 floors in it, and at the top, I'm stood at the top, and I turn the tap on the 5th floor, but all my family members are in those 5 floors. And I said, strategy and in terms of this actual creating this culture will only really be known when the person on the bottom floor gets absolutely wet by the drips coming through. Mm-hmm. Because I can be as great as I want to be at the top, but if that water doesn't drip down before, obviously, in terms of they feel it, and that every year we've been able, fortunately, we've then put a 7th floor and a 10th floor, a 14th floor. Mm-hmm. So that's become harder, and I suppose as I've said to my senior team and then to the people who are leading the business in the actual sort of in terms of the divisions is, I need you also to put your own taps now in and to actually start, because the floor, the journey down won't get there quick enough unless everybody's actually in terms of turning the taps on.
But that's, I mean, what strikes me again is a unique position that you're in to sort of build this tower block, right? Because when you started 1,500 people, you're laying the foundations and building up from there. Whereas I guess, other businesses are probably, maybe they're 20 floors high, thinking about they'll turn the taps on the top floor, but it's going out the gutters, out the building because the foundations are rotten. And how do you, listen, it's a similar type of, not talking about anything to do with the platform we have, but as a business here, like we certainly see that. I started here nearly 9 years ago now. We were 20 people, and you do start to see a competitive advantage in being a small team that grows rapidly with one another, competing against the established players in the space, and not shying away from that, but actually bottling it up as part of your DNA and what makes you different. And I think businesses looking to partner in this space, they actively seek out businesses like yours because this is a people industry.
Yeah, I think getting the ability to amplify, and I think that's what you just said, is that, and equally, I've got no desire to go and move into a different organisation, but you look at, and it's interesting about how would I go into, and you're absolutely right, I've been fortunate to have grown in this space, in this company. But I wonder if I went into a larger organisation, could I replicate it? And how long would it take? And they say that culture takes years to actually, and therefore, as long as there was a commitment that culture didn't need to change overnight, there is probably, and I think leadership does drive down, and therefore people will adopt a lead, and actually they'll either adopt or they'll realise that that's not the right environment they want to work in anymore. Yep. But I think the biggest thing I would say about in terms of the technology side is the amplification in a bigger organisation. I think that's what I alluded to here, the scalability. You can't do it just on a voice anymore. Paul, and no disrespect, but Paul can't be in every Tesco or can't be in every train station or can't be in anything. Yeah. So actually, you've got to come up with a strategy and a solution and a technology, and I think that's where, in terms of technology, it does work, where you can still be authentic, but you can also, and equally, you can see engagement. And that's the other thing that's important, because you can build it all, can't you? It's like Emperor's Clothes. You can build it all, and if nobody actually comes and uses it, everybody at the top thinks, oh, was that brilliant? Yeah. The marketing director and everybody's going, oh, we built it. But actually, if there's no outcome of it, what was the point?
Exactly. And I feel a word that's popped up a lot in your answers, Paul, the discussion here is importance. It's important rather than just feeling like, obviously we need to communicate with everyone. Obviously everyone needs to know about X, Y, Z, but you place such an importance on it. And to go back to the analogy of your tower block and the taps, how are you, helping all of your leadership team, your managers, to know how to turn the taps on or to have their own taps? Because you do need to empower all of those teams. Do you just hope that it's a lead by example situation? Is there some hand holding? How are you making sure those taps are not, dripping, and hopefully that flooding to the ground floor is like really effective?
I love how we're leaning into this collectively here.
I think a couple of things, and hiring for behaviours is an interesting one. Trying to look at traits before you put people into that environment, because it's not for everybody in terms of in terms of how you bring people into this culture. Yeah. So that's a big thing. We've brought in, we brought managing. In fact, I was just thinking now we've got 3 managing directors, and I can probably picture them all. I've tried to bring them in who I've looked at and gone, do you know what? They fit the journey we're on. They fit the culture. the bulk of our workforce, our family members are in the operational channels, clearly. They are the frontline community. So we have a chief operating officer and then 3 managing directors. And I think probably trying to also align, I'm very fortunate that my COO who I put in, or I promoted actually, he was an MD and then he promoted up to COO, he equally, in terms of is able to be comfortable to actually go and drive that. I think one area that I've done, and I'm sure if they listen to this, that they'll feel this, is I'm trying to encourage non-traditional leaders in my direct sphere to go and live and breathe the business. And what I mean by that, I mean my CFO, it was great, absolutely quality, has driven us in a certain way and done certain things. My HR director, you think is a bit, in terms of a bit sort of obviously a natural one, but even people like my director of legal, I'm trying to get them, and they've all got now, to answer your question, they've all got work streams or objectives that takes them into, and some of them like it, some of them are a bit, I've got a day job to do, Paul. Where does this actually fit in? I said, this fits in perfectly because this is about it. And then equally, or some of our recognition, rewards and remuneration is all around those behaviours. So rewarding people for good behaviours that actually mirror that down. And I think that's allowed us to turn the taps on many times. And I sometimes I glance over and I think, oh, that's just happened in the business. I didn't know about that. Should I have known about that? And that's not saying that I'm not aware of key things that are happening, but actually it's quite nice when you can see, it's like, and I've said this also recently internally, and again, don't read too much into it. I've said it'd be great. One of the things that I've actually wondered about, if I disappeared for 6 months, what happens? And it's an interesting bit, isn't it? Because as a leader, or as any manager, or as any person in any business, you want to be valued.
And you want to do yourself out of a job, ultimately.
But actually, the sense of achievement would be that it just continued to fly.
Yeah.
And therefore, and I think, and I was having a chat with the chairman yesterday, actually, ironically yesterday, about could I move away and do, I don't know, a project or do something else? And don't worry, that's not where we were going with it. But I don't feel any risk in the team that are there now. So I think I've been able to. I think if, to your point, Peter, if you went into an organisation that's 20,000 strong, and equally, if I go back, it's over just nearly 10 years now, this business, as I said, was hemorrhaging. It had gone and it had disappeared off all the commercial landscapes. It had no respect from its in terms of peers in the market. It really was seen as, obviously, in terms of business, that you would, if it wasn't part of a bigger group, you'd have collapsed it. It was that bad. It was making significant 7-digit losses. On a business turnover 30 million. So you can do the maths yourself. So I think that's probably testimony that it took probably the first 2-3 years to change culture. And that was without any communication tools. That was without any platform. And some of the thing now, I suppose we're in the fortunate position that some of the investments we'll make in this space in the future are around getting it right, rather than what was a bit of a journey of and then people say, oh, you have a business plan, don't you? And those images you see of the route to the top of the mountain being like up and down, up and down, up and down, it's absolutely true. And I remember just on comms and on communication, we rolled out a desire to try and drive. So that story I talk about, the front line doing some of the comms, we had a cleaner who was cleaning on one of the train stations, and we got asked to clean up after a tragic event of a crime that had happened, and he decided that he was going to take a photo of the crime scene. And he put it on thinking he was doing a great job cleaning up the crime scene, and you can imagine the social media frenzy that then did around bad communication, because obviously he thought he was just doing a great job of cleaning the site up.
Because he was seeing it as his job, that's what he was looking at.
So we had a whole wraparound around what is appropriate communication and how do you do it, and therefore training staff up accordingly. But again, you don't also want to stifle it. You don't want you don't want everything going back to your scripted bit. You need that bit of people to show a bit of genuine sort of love for what they do.
And that came from a place of him being proud of the work he was doing, and it's difficult. We definitely get into moderation sometimes, don't we, Peter, talking about, that is a whole topic in itself, but because that behaviour was the right thing, but maybe executed in the wrong way. But he wanted to show people what he'd been doing, and therefore have some either solutions versus hug. He wasn't saying, oh, look what I'm doing, I get to work on this. He was wanting people to say, like, you're doing a great job. And had the platform to do that, and obviously executed in the incorrect way. But I think it's interesting when things like that, you think, well, gosh, that was a bit of a nightmare, or that went wrong. But then if you think about the behaviour that drove that.
Exactly, the intention, right? Like
exactly,
you know, when the dust has settled from the media storm, it's a high quality problem. You've got an employee, probably a workforce, engaged and wanting to share what they're doing, which is yeah, I mean, I'm interested to think about, as you know, where this does go wrong from a leadership perspective as well, because I think, you know, again, there's definitely a theme here about the unique position that you're in. I wonder how many other CEOs out there are thinking, to your question with Georgie's metaphor extension about how you get the taps going on the lower floors. And, you know, one of the first things I think you said was building it into the hiring profiles and making sure that people you're bringing into the business, this is like aligned with their kind of skill set and capability, which is another kind of reason why, you know, building a company in the way that you are allows you to sort of curate the types of profiles that you're looking for and so on. And I do wonder how many other CEOs are thinking about that kind of communication capability as a core skill set for the leaders that they want to bring into their business, because it has a huge knock-on effect to all of the other floors. But I'm guessing it's not always perfect. You know, you bring in leaders, and, you know, definitely don't want to talk about any personal examples here, but just in sort of general terms.
Give us some horror stories.
Yeah. Be real. I don't want to spook people listening that you know, you guys have got this all on lockdown. Like,
but have you got any examples where you think, oh my gosh, we should have done this, or we should have just, you know, I shouldn't have had the script, or I shouldn't have sent an email, or I should have put my phone number on my email signature.
I mean, there are examples without a shadow of a doubt of where communication has probably not been as succinct as it needed to be, and I think that rather than going down and drilling down into specifics that people would very quickly be able to. I remember that.
Nicholas sitting there, don't say it. Paul.
No, and I would suggest that the biggest thing that has probably been a learning curve around all of that is to, and it's interesting you say that, it's also communicating a constant message. So I remember that I've done things in the past, personally I've done things in the past where I might have gone and said, oh, this over here, but it wasn't in sync with what the messaging was over here.
Right.
And before you know it, you then get this workforce who go, well, hold on. And I remember we talked about it the other about the real living wage. And I remember it communicated out saying we're joining the movement of real living wage. Well, everybody then immediately thought we were paying everybody the real living wage from day one.
Yeah.
Even though the journey started that we only had 18%, when we were back in 1,600 employees, we only had 18% of the staff who were paid the real living wage. It's now 98 point something. But I remember the comms were so bad that I got it wrong, where I said, oh yeah, we're attaching the real living wage. And I literally, within got emails saying, brilliant, Paul, he's absolutely brilliant, you're going to pay us all the real living wage, which is like 10% more. And I was like, oh, wow, need to recover that. And actually, because the euphoria was to tell the story about we were attaching this movement. But
because you're so excited as well.
Yeah, we weren't properly joined up. And that goes back probably some of that exact bit we talked about, the heart bit versus the proper script, the consistency bit. And that was a big recovery of having to go back out to employees and say to employees, actually, no, we will get there. And yes, many years on, we are there now. But it wasn't communicated in the correct way.
I'm sorry, this feels like we're in the weeds, but it's a perfect example. Why did that happen? Because they misinterpreted something, or your words weren't clear enough, or like what actually?
I would suggest that at that time, I probably wasn't clear enough of how and this is probably about the communication of the team, of just not going off and sort of leading off and going, oh, Paul's just put this out, or he's done something, without actually saying, is the HR director read it? Has somebody else read it? And that's where you come back to that scripted bit. As you sort of get into this whole corporate world, and I get shot down because I still think we're a small business. But everybody says 150 million, you're not small business anymore. But I like to think we're a small business. But in that way, I also sometimes feel that I should challenge myself more to actually not treat myself as a small business leader.
Well, I think this is the thing, right? It's like we, as humans, I think you always try and like pit this sort of binary decision against one another. Do you know what I mean? Like you're black or you're white, you're Labour or you're Conservative.
Yeah,
you're up
or
or
I'm a
down,
CEO, I'm a CFO, I'm a...
you just to sort of simplify the like equation or the decision. Yeah. But with like communication like that, there are times when you do need to make sure your HR director's ready and you've probably got some lines and like this is a communication of such import to my employees, to the questions right at the start. I respect them too much to get this wrong. I'm going to deliver this in a certain way. And maybe it will feel slightly more robotic than you're used to with Paul. But guess what? Like, this isn't laughy, jokey empathy. This is more like, these are your livelihoods and I want to deliver this message in a responsible way. But that doesn't mean that, 80% of the time you also can't be your authentic self in the way that you communicate. I guess what it comes down to is, having the kind of the range in your capability to deliver different messages in different ways, depending on what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've definitely learned that. But equally, there is also that point of the genuine bit about that story was the drive was still to get everybody up to the real living wage. I suppose that wasn't just a PR story, it's still there now as. And every time we bid a contract, it's trying to pick the right customers to come on that journey with us. And therefore, I think the staff overall, as I said, you do get challenges with everybody in terms of from time to time, but I think overall the family members recognise that communication was genuine, not it was done in the wrong way to try and obviously just give a PR story out in that regard.
And even probably your sort of, sorry, that was slightly the wrong communication, probably came across in the right way, rather than again another corporate message like, please disregard the initial, it was like, whoa, okay, this was positioned incorrectly, so it's sometimes like how you deal with those mistakes as well can be really authentic rather than feeling, actually now we need to put up another statement or another release or something. So I'm really keen to understand, Paul, as well. I feel like you became famous where I used to work because you were just all over LinkedIn, and we spoke about it earlier. It's just like such a big part of you as a leader, and you want to shout about that. You're proud of it, and other people are proud to work for Carlisle. How are you making sure that is visible for everybody, if that's a platform that you're showing sort of pride in and what Carlisle is like? And are all of your other leaders also using that to showcase that sort of visibility as well?
Yeah. Would you believe that I was never on social media before I came to Carlisle?
Really?
It's an interesting thing. I worked for a large facilities company. I won't mention them, but I was absolutely anti it. And I also in personal life I was anti it as well.
Like, it's the devil. Look at you now.
There were two very simple things that changed the journey really, or started the journey and have continued in that respect. One was ethical and visible leadership in terms of authentic, and also in terms that had purpose, and biscuit boy and whatever you want to call that sort of journey around that bit. But then we needed a megaphone, and I can't remember why. But then I sort of went on LinkedIn.
I'd be so intrigued to know what the catalyst was. Somebody said something in the pub, was like, Paul.
Yeah.
And you were like, I need to be on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And then and I'd used other platforms when I was at the previous company, as in between. So I came out of that facilities business and I stepped into a different business, which was outside of Carlisle, but it was in the group. It was Blue Arrow, large industrial recruit. I was commercial director there, and we actually created, and I was part of the creation of an enhancing people's life strategy, which was similar to the journey that. And I was very passionate about how we were driving that before I came into being asked by the owner to come into this environment. But I think really in that regard, whilst that bit is the absolute purpose of it, we would not be here today without a common platform that drove that bit to be allowing to people to see it.
Yeah.
And not everybody's on it equally. Even you'd think now, wouldn't you, in this modern world that everybody must be on social media. It's strange that not everybody is. And that's why, the magazine, so the grandkids can see granddad in the picture and stuff like that is important. But LinkedIn and social media platforms, and probably a consistent platform. If I ever wrote the book about the journey, those would be the two things: being genuine, being consistent. And we've seen over time people try to replicate that, and that's interestingly, that's one of the things I take away from this. You can't replicate that. In fairness, you either got it or you haven't. In fairness, that authentic leadership.
I agree.
And it is interesting that I've seen various leaders trying to do it, and also our competitors will try and do it if they're trying to bid against on a bit of contract, they'll try and do it for a bit of time, and then it drifts off. And
right. Their consistency isn't there.
The LinkedIn bit is bizarre, and equally now, in fairness, people will. Sounds really bizarre, doesn't it? People notice when I go away for a week or something. It's very sad.
Yeah, where's my feed?
It's sad in one way. It's sad in one way where they go, Paul, and even somebody texted me the other day, said, "Are you all right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm all right." He said, "No, we haven't seen you.
Yeah.
This is like we haven't seen you. It's like when you said to your relatives, "I haven't seen you for a bit of time." Okay, wow, all right. I'll do a post just for you in terms of it, but it is. It's nice because then equally though, one of the interesting bits about it, and I suppose this is the bit about it'd be interesting to actually understand the sentiment, because not all our frontline family members are on LinkedIn. It is a professional networking platform. So at some point we did create something, but again, not everybody on that. But then equally, what percentage? I don't know the answer. This is your game to a certain degree. Will you ever get 100%? Interaction with people? I don't know. I'm assuming they used to say, do you know, it's a completely different stat, but they used to say, do you know, when you take a new job on, you join a job 100% engaged, and then it only goes south from there, doesn't it? In terms of it, and it's trying to work out, well, what's the best that you can do to keep people engaged in that regard. But I suppose you can always be half glass empty. I sit back and one thing that I don't do as a leader, and I don't do enough of it, is people say you don't live in the moment, Paul. Because you're always looking about something else, and sometimes I actually think, do you know what? It's not all bad. There's some great things that are happening, and just sometimes you do want to just sort of sit back and let that have its own mind.
Talking about LinkedIn, Paul, I think you understand the merit of multi-channel but consistent message.
Yeah.
Because you're not going all in on one channel. You're understanding that the magazine plays a part. You're understanding how email plays a part. But it's across those channels, but it's how you're delivering that message in sort of your tone, or that consistent tone or narrative. I think that's like definitely come through in lots of your examples today as well.
Yeah, and I'd probably say, in fact, if you interviewed the comms team or the marketing team, it's without design though. Which I suppose in one sense is going back to that authenticness. It's just it's just genuine. There is no comm strategy that actually has all this mapped out. I shouldn't really be saying this really too much because we are a big business, but yeah, I suppose in one sense that means that hopefully people genuinely see it and go, okay, yeah, all right, it's even more relevant, because they're not trying to grow our social media followers to 20,000 or to get our hit rate. Now all that is obviously clear in a corporate web is tracked. But there is not anyway, so I suppose I've opened up a bit to more of my competitors there, but it's not
over-engineered.
No, in that regard.
So I would like to know, Paul, lots of our listeners and our audience are very much probably like internal communicators in businesses your size or larger, and they are probably finding this a really refreshing conversation, being like, oh my gosh, I wish I had a Paul in my business. I think it is a really refreshing approach to comms, but I'd love to know, like, what's your advice to internal comms leaders that want or need to get their leadership team involved, like all of the examples you've talked through? What would your advice to them be?
I suppose, in fact, I sit in a camp that, therefore, I'm not used to. That's alien to me in terms of a leader not wanting to be in there. I think if I look back at Nicole and sort of her team when we've been on this journey, the director of marketing, my advice would be is try and understand what the CEO is really trying to achieve for themselves, really, and trying to. And I always had a very clear vision. I mean, the why statement for Carlisle hasn't changed, nor have the values haven't changed in 8. And I had a massive frustration in previous employments that we'd do a new vision statement every 2 years, or we'd do a new set of values, or we'd do something else. And I said, well, no, they are the DNA. And I've sort of said from early doors is to be clear and to understand, well, what is underneath the skin of the purpose of the CEO. The challenge also is, and I suppose this is an interesting bit, and we've had a bit of this in the last couple of years, is align into that without trying to we sort of looked at that, and I worried that we get different people who've got marketing or internal comms strategies that don't align to that senior CEO, and therefore you do end up with people running off going, but the marketing book says we should do this.
Yeah.
I sort of said, yeah, but that's not the DNA of the business. So, and interestingly, and I'll again share, we have this big thing about corporate pages and personal pages. So,
pages
on LinkedIn, we have a corporate page. We have something that comes out through Carlisle, and then we have all the leaders. And I'm going to say something obvious. You get more traffic through the leadership of actually people posting as behalf of Paul Evans or in terms of it. Which I write all my own content, which is absolutely in terms of there's no ghostwriting in there. But the marketing team will want to post it through the corporate page because they've been trained to think it's all about driving corporate adoption.
Yep.
And I have that discussion with them on a regular basis of going, I get it, I get that's what you want, but in reality, this is what the employees and what the market is actually. They're keen to listen to authentic stories from leaders.
Real
from
people.
Leaders, yeah. So I suppose that would be my message to internal comms is try and listen to that CEO's motives and try and get time with them to understand it. And then the best thing you can do is, I suppose in fairness, I've only got a small team at comms, so I can't take everybody into my own organisation. But if you're genuinely passionate about comms, find a leader who absolutely, because I suppose in fairness for Nicole, she will openly say, and even more so now with a lot of the team that are with me, she'll say our job's easy because you give us all the content. And therefore, I think that's probably the reverse way around, is that if you're dragging somebody up the hill, it's an impossible job, really. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't want a lot of my fellow CEOs to get resignation letters now on the day after they listen to this, but I think it is a marriage. I think if you're trying to drag people, and also people will see that it's not authentic, because I've seen very leaders that you can see their internal comms team have either started ghostwriting for them or something, and it's just never been like that before.
Yeah, it's just
and
like, you don't sound like that.
They've just grown up. And it's like, what? Well, you weren't like that Tuesday last week, and now all of a sudden you've got this whole 5 post a day strategy. Where's that come from?
No, I agree. Listen, we had Ed from Wrecking Housing on the last episode, and we were we had this hypothetical question about how you would create the same sense of trust that he had where he was, and if he was to go to another business. And it's a similar sort of answer in the sense that, in my interview process, I'll be challenging the CEO or the leader or whoever my manager is to demonstrate the type of culture that they are committed to and give me examples of that, because there's only so much that you can do as an individual contributor. You ultimately, your internal comms and so on is a reflection of your culture. It can't by itself change it. And to your point, I think we've got to be grown up about challenging one another if we're in a role to understand how to communicate well by having a CEO articulate their vision and kind of the key levers that we should be pulling. Or if you're going somewhere else, as in that example, before you jump into that environment, checking that there's vision lock in the way that you think about comms. So I appreciate that answer, not advocating for mass resignations either. But, I think that we can talk about tactics and sort of levers that you can pull and tools that you can use. But one person, I don't think, can change that internal comms attitude by themselves in established businesses. But I think that my one takeaway here is that, in a businesses like yours that have been growing rapidly over the past 5 or 6 years are uniquely positioned to set themselves up for future success by having internal comms as a competitive advantage ultimately, because it's very difficult to retrofit that. And I wonder how many other CEOs in that position are truly thinking like you were, because it's a lesson, I think.
And my last question, which I didn't prep you for, Paul, is we're building a playlist for comms leaders because it's a tough gig. Sometimes they're a team of one and everybody needs a hype playlist, right? So everyone we've had on the podcast or we've had on stage at live events, we've said, can you submit a track for this ultimate survival playlist for comms leaders? Would you have a track that you'd like to submit?
Oh, crikey. You haven't prepared me for this, but
it's better off the cuff.
No. Well, I'll go for tub thumping. I get knocked down, but I get back up again.
Such a good one. Such a good one.
I love it.
Great, we're adding
there's so many knockdowns in life.
But we go again.
There you go. If nothing else, for your friends and family, I guess. Paul has been in stealth mode for the past couple of months, but that was just to prepare for coming on the Blink podcast. So thank you very much for coming, Paul. What a pleasure to have you.
Paul, thank you so much. So nice to see you again and sharing some of the behind the scenes about why you're so involved as a leader and why it's been so powerful and effective.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.